Matt Rizzetta, welcome to the Sport Businessman podcast. It is an honor to be hosting you today, or should we say, benvenuto.
Grazie Edoardo, piacere tutto mio, grazie.
So, it was announced yesterday, September 25th, on the most important journals worldwide about your launch of Underdog Global Partners. Can you tell us what drove you to build Underdog Global Partners in today's growing sports private equity focused landscape and the growth of funds that has been arriving in the space, and the how do you educate the market for building in this space?
Sure, I'm happy to, and Eduardo, it's really a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on everything you're doing. Big fan of the podcast. So yeah, Underdog Global Partners, we're really excited. We just officially launched, as you mentioned, on the 25th of September. That was really an exciting moment for us. I've really been blessed in many ways. I had started a business about 16, 17 years ago. It was a media and marketing business called North Six Agency. I spent a decade or so working really hard to scale the business, and we turned it into a pretty significant business, at least in our sector. We grew to become one of the top 50 firms in our sector. And then after about 10 years or so of doing that, I was really looking at the world around me, and I was starting to study the market and wanted to really learn about new types of businesses. And at the time, this is in 2019, 2020, around then, sports investing and was really taking off, particularly European assets. And you had a lot of American investors and private equity investors and Middle East investors that were starting to invest in European clubs, particularly obviously football clubs. And it was always a dream of mine to buy into an Italian team. I had a little bit of a different vision than some of the larger private equity firms. My vision was really betting on the underdog. The first club we bought was Campobasso, which I felt had a massive potential to really turn into a platform that represented all of the immigrants and the underdogs and people who came from humble roots. And there was a massive addressable market also in the North American continent. There's, I think, 4 or 5 times the amount of people from Campobasso and the greater Molise region in North America than there is in Italy. So for me, given my skill set with media and marketing and sales in the North American market, that was really attractive. And that's how we got into it. And that's how this whole thing started. And yesterday's announcement, Underdog Global Partners, was sort of the culmination of everything I've been doing for the past 5 years. I've worked really hard to build a foundation and a platform. And now we have multiple assets under management. We have four sports franchises and sports assets across the world. We have some media and IP assets. We're starting to get very acquisitive around real estate, that in terms of stadium developments and academy developments and things of that nature. So I built this incredible network and deal flow pipeline. And of course, we've had a lot of experience at this point operating these assets. And yesterday was the culmination of that. So we launched Underdog Global Partners. Our thesis really is around investing in the underdog, finding assets, sports, media, and real estate assets that might be a little bit undervalued for one reason or another, sourcing those deals through our network, getting great terms, and then bringing them to life through media and marketing and storytelling and really building value for the asset. And as amazing as sports investing is, when you look at some of these top tier, particularly European assets, sometimes they look great on paper, but you have to ask yourself, what's the upside? If you're getting into a deal, obviously it's everyone's dream to own Premier League teams and top tier clubs, and certainly one day through UGP, through Underdog Global Partners, I believe we'll get there. But you have to also ask yourself, what is the upside return profile on some of those things? So our thesis is usually, look at the downside risk, and then if you can breathe into life a great brand, great vision, build incremental revenue, build great fan bases, the upside return on some of those smaller clubs is actually greater than what you're looking at with some of the top tier teams.
And one of your first entries, investment entries in the Italian sports landscape was in Ascoli. What can you suggest to foreign investors entering the Italian professional sports landscape? Is it investing? And then you acquired Campobasso. But what can you suggest to new entrants in the space, whether to do it through syndication or and being part of a group and of investors, or buying it themselves to build with just one to two partners?
I think
And
it's
what's
tough.
the difference?
I think it's a challenge, Eduardo, to sort of generalize what a piece of advice or recommendation would be, because the marketplace is so nuanced, and every prospective buyer is so different in terms of what their motivations are, what their resources are, what they're passionate about. So it's hard, I think, to generalize. But I would say, just in my experience, the first investment we made was a minority investment. As you mentioned, we were in Ascoli, and that was really a great learning lesson for me. It was a learning experience. There was so much great, there were so much great so many great memories, and we had so many great experiences, and we also had a lot of challenges. And I think the big thing that I noted from that investment was that, at least in our case, for our model, we really try to get control stakes in our assets and sort of bet on ourselves as operators. And in the case of Ascoli, we shared the club with a few other partners. We were minority shareholders, and I think that created challenges just in terms of understanding what, getting tough to get alignment on what the vision is, what the budget is, what markets we're investing in, how we're investing in the sporting side and the real estate side versus other areas of the business. So I think that was the big learning lesson for me in the Ascoli investment. However, I have to tell you that if it wasn't for that experience, we would have never been able to be in the position we are today, where we're operating clubs in a control position. And, we've won now. Ascoli brought us back to Campobasso, and we've won, as you know, 2 championships in Campobasso. We have a
Yeah.
nationally syndicated TV series that was sold to Disney and ESPN, which has been like a dream come true. So none of those things would have happened without the experiences from some of the early days of our of our soccer journey. And I think that is also why I said this is the launch of Underdog Global Partners. For me, is the culmination of everything, all the sweat equity I've put in over the past 5 or 6 years, and the great network we've built, and the great experiences we've had, and the lessons learned, and all of that stuff rolled into one, has kind of culminated as of September 25th, and this represents the next chapter of what we're building.
So when investors read and find out about the opportunity of Underdog Global Partners as an investor, to help them understand what is your, it promises priceless experiences and exclusive access. And Matt, what is your true and one in a million framework of how you educate investors on the unconventional and undervalued sports assets like Campobasso, Donnarumma, and Napoli Basket, in an industry of sports and media, which has emotional ROI. And as you mentioned before, it's important to ask what is the upside and return profile. Um, how do you educate the investor, and what is your framework on that?
I think you're getting to the heart of probably the most important part of sports investing, which is that it has a much more layered and complex ROI metric than some of the other private equity investments, which is when, you're investing in private equity, typically you'll look at your IRR, your internal rate of return, which of course, like, when you're looking at sports too, I mean, you need to have a really sound path to liquidity. There's no question about it. But the sports investment is about more than just IRR. It's about so many other things. And I'm living proof of that. I put a significant amount of my own personal capital into this over the past 5 or 6 years to buy these clubs, and then to invest in working capital to win leagues and to grow the clubs, and in marketing, and to build infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. And I look back now, and it's about so much more than just the financial return of that asset. I've become I've become really blessed. I mean, I've gotten into amazing relationships and lived experiences that you can't put a price on. And, through some of those relationships and experiences, I've been able to invest in other things that over the course of the past 5 or 6 years, from a financial standpoint, have really have changed my life. And I think that that's something that any investor who's getting into sports has to evaluate. You can't just look in a silo and say, we're investing in this one sports asset, and if it doesn't return, 5 to 10x capital in 3, 5, 7 years or whatever a typical private equity outlook would be, this is a failure. You can't look at it that way. You have to look at it, I think, much more holistically based on the sum of the parts. This deal might walk you into another deal, which walks you into another deal. And then all of a sudden, instead of having a 5 to 10x return profile on one sports asset, you might have a 15 or 20x return profile across a much more diversified portfolio that includes so many other things beyond just sports. But that deal flow was enabled because of your entryway into sports. So I think that's really interesting. And then look, I got to a stage of my life, Edoardo, where it's just not about, everything is not about money. And that's why whenever we talk to prospective investors or LPs, like who are looking strictly based on a financial return profile and nothing else, usually it means that there's some misalignment here, because this is also about having fun and experiencing things that you would never experience otherwise. I mean, my journey in the sports investing landscape has brought me to amazing places. It's brought me to meet incredible relationships I never would have dreamed of having otherwise. It's brought my family closer together in many ways. I just got back from Italy with my oldest daughter, Viviana, a month ago. That was one of the best experiences I ever had in my life. So sports, I think when you talk about ROI in sports, it's a much more layered, I think, and complex analysis than just looking at, hey, I'm going to put X amount of money into this private equity fund or firm, and this is what my expected return is going to be.
But I find that I viewed it myself, and I think any other viewer and the rest of the world can see that just by watching a brief clip or an episode of Running with the Wolves, we can tell how much fun you're having with the assets that you're leading, and especially Campobasso, because it transmitted to the audience member, myself as well. I could tell
Appreciate that.
how fun it was.
Thanks,
And
Eduardo. Appreciate that.
and discussing about your what's very interesting is the portfolio strategy. Are there any synergies that exist between your holdings of building in Brooklyn FC, one of the most important youth development and talent markets in the United States, Donnarumma, in Rome, where it's also full of many student athletes that come from the United States who are looking for professional opportunities abroad, and they come to Rome maybe to get an education and also become athletes as well, especially female athletes and female soccer players, as well as in Napoli basket. Is there are there any synergies, and if there are, could you guide us through them?
Absolutely. That's the name of the game with this. You're really building an ecosystem. In our case, through UGP, through Underdog Global Partners, we're creating an ecosystem of talent. And the talent is not just on the pitch or on the court or on the field. The talent's obviously off the field as well. So when you talk about synergies, how can you consolidate functions? There's that element of the model: back office, administrative functions, legal, finance, marketing, sales. Like, a lot of those things can obviously be consolidated in a way that benefits the economies of the economy of the model. But beyond that, I look at things like, you're familiar with the word, I don't know if some of your audience is, but calcio turismo, tourism, building tourism around, soccer and sports, having access to markets in North America. Our club up in Quebec, in Montreal, is a really, really incredible talent rich market. And they have incredible desire to go over to Italy and to experience what it's like to be a part of a professional football club. And, there's kids in Montreal that we're going to be bringing over to Italy for, our women's team, Donnarumma. There's going to be girls up in Canada that we bring over there. And then vice versa. There's going to be players in Italy and Europe and some of our other assets that want to come experience what life is like in North America. And as we continue to add assets and scale, we're going to be building some really cool projects that we'll be adding to the portfolio over the next 12 to 18 to 24 months. That is all going to be a part of it. So I think, you look at synergies both from an expense standpoint, which is where consolidation helps. You look at synergies from how can you grow incremental revenue. And that's where things like tourism and travel and clinics and bundling sales together, sponsorships together. If you're sponsoring one club, you can sell a sponsorship to multiple clubs. So from a revenue standpoint, that's where synergies benefit the most. But I think the most important part of the synergies is it's really talent synergies. It's you're building a talent ecosystem, like I said. And the name of the game in any business obviously is attracting and then retaining talent. So in our model through UGP, if we can attract talent, number one, and then retain talent by giving them opportunities to have channels into other assets that we own, to us, that's a great thing. If you come in and let's say you play for Campobasso, right? But your goal is to become a Serie A level player, maybe in another country, and that team happens to GP. For us, we've been able to retain you as talent in the portfolio, and that's obviously an example of a player. But the same thing is true of somebody who's a front office staff member. If someone comes in as a general manager of one club, and we can retain them, and they want to go work for another club or experience another culture, another part of the world, that all lives within the UGP umbrella. For us, that's a great thing.
Incredible, Matt. And for the last question for the audience member, what is for the audience members, what is your long-term vision for UGP? Where are we going to see it in the next 5 to 10 years? And in this strategy, are there any more emerging markets or sports that you're watching closely for future expansion?
Well, the first question around UGP, look, we really want to get after it. For me, this is a personal mission of mine. I've really cut my teeth over the past 5 or 6 years, kind of scrapping my way into finding these assets and then building these assets, bringing them to life, and then building value for them. And I think UGP now is our chance to show that we can do that at scale on a very, very big stage. So I think a lot of the deal flow that we're in now is certainly much more significant than it was 5 or 6 years ago in terms of the size and scale and market opportunities of the deals we're looking at. So I think we're trying to show that, by maintaining the same discipline that we've always had, which is, hard work, put our heads down, humility, mix some innovation in there, learn from mistakes. And I think from those sort of things, we're trying to show that we can really build a very, very significant portfolio of consequence at scale with much larger deals. So I think that's really the name of the game for UGP over the next couple of years. We're going to really try to go after it and become a major player in this fast growing economy of sports and private equity. And I think UGP, for us, our vision is to sit at the intersection of three very, very interesting enterprise markets, which are number one, private equity, number two, media, and number three, sort of sports multi-club ownership groups. And we want to sit at the intersection of all three of those. Your second question, just around emerging markets and places we're looking at, I think the women's sports economy is obviously a place that we're betting on pretty heavily. We're trying to look for deals that are haven't gotten to the point of saturation yet, for lack of a better word. I think, you look at the NWSL, I mean, investors who got into the NWSL, like Alexis Ohanian and whatnot, 5 or 10 years ago, obviously were brilliant and they got in extremely early. Now we're sort of looking at what is the next opportunity in women's sports that we're trying to bet on now, that has relatively low risk, but has incredible high upside growth opportunities. That's why we built our project in Rome with Donnarumma. Really, the vision there is to turn Rome into an international destination for women's soccer. We bought the only independent professional women's team in Rome. So our thinking there was that we really wanted to create a standalone brand that wasn't overshadowed, like, as as a consumer of European soccer and football, a lot of the women's teams over there, which are amazing women's teams, sometimes get overshadowed because they're part of a larger multi-sport structure that includes men's teams. So the Real Madrid women's team, the AS Roma women's team, as amazing as they are, oftentimes they get overshadowed by the men's affiliate. So we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to create a team by women, for women, that was independently, women operated and just didn't have any affiliation with a larger men's branch that could overshadow it. So that's what Donnarumma is. And I think we're going to look for deals like that in other markets too. We looked at volleyball, I think is an interesting sport that's growing, particularly in the United States. Cricket obviously is growing pretty quickly. So we'll look at that, but we got to stick to our roots, and it's got to be something we're passionate about, I think, for it to make sense from an operating and investment standpoint.
Fantastic. So we look forward to Campobasso's road to Serie A. We'll keep on watching Running with the Wolves, Donnaruma's start in Serie A Femminile, and Napoli Basket's entry into the Euroleague. Thank you so much, Matt, for your time. It was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience to host you on the podcast.
Thank you, Edoardo. Sempre un piacere.